Some scientists argue that the existence of God cannot be proven with science. Would this be a valid argument?
Yes, well, these days it's a very common question. The existence of God cannot be proven through scientific means. Look, if the implication there is you cannot experimentally verify the existence of God, that's correct, because God is beyond time, space, and matter, which means we cannot test the supernatural. We can only test things around us. We can only test things that are physical, which means that technically then from a scientific perspective, we would agree with that. But usually people leave that question halfway. They don't explain the full argument. If you're talking about proving the existence of God from a scientific means, with empirical evidence, then you should say you can neither prove or disprove the existence of God scientifically. But proving things, this is the interesting thing, is not only done through experimentational data. Most people don't realize that. There is a thing called in philosophy inference. We prove things through inference as well. And we have very valid arguments in regards to this. And not everything in the universe can be tested. We don't realize that too. Well, if I were to give you one example, 5% of the universe is observable to us. We can observe the galaxies through our telescopes. Now we have the James Webb telescope, the Hubble telescope, there are many Kepler telescopes. We can observe many of the galaxies in the universe, but that's only about 5% of the universe itself. 95% of the universe is made up of matter, which we call dark matter. It is not possible to detect dark matter. It is not possible to test dark matter in a lab through experimentation. That's very interesting. But we all accept that it exists. Scientists accept that it exists. And how do we know it exists? In a way, we know it exists through mathematical calculations and inference. That's what I meant by inference there. Now, to give you one example, if you look at the Milky Way galaxy, there are about 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. They all orbit the center of mass at the center of our galaxy, which is a huge black hole. It's called Sagittarius A, at velocities close to 1 million kilometers per hour. It's an immense speed, including our sun. It's about 800,000 kilometers per hour. It's moving. All the stars are moving. Now, at that velocities, normally all those stars should be propelled out of the galaxy. They should just move into space, thrown away into space. This is what should happen, unless there is this mass holding them back. And when scientists calculate the mass in the Milky Way galaxy, the required mass to keep the galaxy together, there is only 10% of it there. So 90% of the mass is missing. So automatically they say there is a thing called dark matter, and 90% of this mass is produced by dark matter. Although we cannot see the dark matter and we cannot detect it or we cannot test it because it doesn't interact with electromagnetic radiation. This is very interesting. But nobody says because we are not able to test it in a lab, we're not accepting its existence. Nobody says this. There are many things like that too. Some people say, when I use sometimes arguments for the existence of God, as I said, inference is very important. Sometimes I use the argument, with Leonardo da Vinci and the Mona Lisa painting. When you look at the Mona Lisa's painting, you know that Leonardo da Vinci exists. Because that painting indicates to its artist, the painter. But sometimes the atheists come back and they say, but we know Leonardo da Vinci, he lived, people witnessed that he lived, but with God, yes, you might say there's an art in the universe, but we haven't seen the artist, they say. And I come back and I say, technically, you don't really need to see the artist to know that there is an artist. And one example that I gave, in Australia, in cave paintings, they found 17,500-year-old paintings on the walls of the caves made by the indigenous Australians. 17,500 years, that's a long time, isn't it? Now, do we need to see that a human being painted that? That when we look at the art, we know that it was painted by a human being. We don't need to see the person who painted it. So at the end of the day, when we look at the universe, this is the teleological argument, all the perfection, all the beauty, all the symmetry, all the art we observe in the universe indicates to a great artist. So we don't need to see this artist to confirm his existence. We don't need to see, because we see the art. And art always points to the artist. So proving the existence of God is not limited to, scientific testing. And we can't, as I said, it's not possible for us to test God. You cannot test God with the tools he has created.
That's correct.
He created science, he created the universe. You cannot test God with the tools he created.